This video is brought to you by Into the AM, outfitting your passion. The Browns defense has been the main flaw that people have focused on this team for many good reasons since the start of camp. And most, when they think of this flaw on this team, they think of an upgrade at free safety, specifically Andrew Sadeo, who's not been great this year by any stretch of the imagination. But the issue with that is that, well, free safeties just aren't cheap. They aren't easy to find. It's not a position like linebacker where you can get somebody off the street and find somebody that can fill in just fine. It's a lot more difficult than that. So with that being outlined, how hard it is to find just a simple upgrade at free safety, or how expensive it can be to find a upgrade at free safety, the question becomes, what can the Browns do to fix this defense? So let's talk about it. But before we talk about it, I want to talk to you guys real quick about today's sponsor, Into the AM. In 2020, the world has dramatically changed. So why shouldn't your wardrobe also be included in this? And that's where today's sponsor comes into play. Into the AM makes premium quality shirts, hoodies, and shorts that are perfect for being as comfortable and as flexible as our new normal requires. Into the AM's premium shirts are nice enough to wear during a Zoom meeting and also comfortable enough to wear to the gym. These shirts are soft, they fit great, and they look great. And you know what the old saying is, look good, feel good, play good. So don't waste any more time. And also, you, the viewer, can get 10% off site-wide if you just use the link below, which is intotheam.com/worst take. Again, intotheam.com/worst take. Again, you use that link and you can get 10% off. So why not be comfortable? Why not be flexible? And why not save a little bit of money while you're at it? So the Browns defense has obviously been an issue, but I also don't think this defense is unsalvageable. I think there's a lot of things that you can actually fix with this defense to get it to a good level. And when I say good level, don't get me confused. This is never going to be a top 5 defense in the NFL, not with the pieces constructed. There's a lot of things to fix, but there's a lot of room between top 5 and 32nd. You know, there can be a middle ground there, and I think the Browns can be comfortably in that 15 to 20 range. And with how the offense has looked throughout the beginning of this season, if the Browns defensively can get there, they will be absolutely fine against most teams. And again, these are small things. These aren't necessarily going to be the sexy things that are going to overhaul the entire defense. These are some adjustments that I think the Browns defense can make to get to that level, hopefully. And the first one is, I'm going to read some stats out loud, and I want you guys to tell me what you think is going on. Myles Garrett, via PFF, has 9 sacks and 37 pressures through 7 games. That's on pace to have 20.5, which is only 2 away from tying the all-time single-season sack record held by Michael Strahan, and 86 pressures. To understand how many pressures that's on pace to be, 59 led the league last year. Myles Garrett, by all accounts, is on his way or on pace to have a borderline historically great season, not just for the Cleveland Browns franchise, but in NFL history. He's playing at a historically good level. This is like Aaron Donald 2016 levels of good that he's playing at, which is awesome. But what about his help? Because while Myles is doing all of that, while being thoroughly double teamed on almost every single snap he goes in, his supporting cast, Olivier Vernon, Larry Ogunjobi, and Sheldon Richardson, have combined for 5 sacks and 36 pressures, which means that those 3 combined have been much less productive than Myles Garrett has been just by himself. That's a massive problem. And I think the thing that annoys most fans about that is that that's not a new problem necessarily. Like, that's a problem that absolutely existed last year. The same thing happened last year where Myles Garrett had 10 sacks through 10 games, and his supporting cast through all of the games had like 10 sacks combined. It's not new, and it's something you knew would be a possibility coming into the season because you were bringing back that same supporting cast. And it's kind of worse now because, one, the production on the other side is much less than Myles Garrett when it comes to sacks. Also, Myles Garrett is just being double teamed at a much higher rate. Teams are chipping him at the line and then sending 2 offensive linemen at him. Like that's an absurd amount of attention to put on a Myles Garrett for there not to be any production on the other sides of this defensive line. That's very concerning because, again, the measures teams are going to protect themselves from Myles Garrett are absolutely insane. You know, I mentioned sometimes they send 2 offensive linemen, sometimes it's 2 plus a tight end or a running back, sometimes it's all of that plus they roll the pocket away from Myles. Opposing offenses are basically begging anybody on the Browns defensive line to penetrate but Myles Garrett. And the sad thing is nobody has been able to consistently do that. Larry Ogunjobi had his moments early on in the season, but has since not been as good in the last few games. Olivier Vernon had 1 good game, but has flatlined everywhere else. Porter Gustin, a similar story. Adrian Claiborne, a similar story. You know, you look back at the Bengals game, you're seeing Olivier Vernon at $12 million a year struggling with Bobby Hart or Bobby Hart's backup at times, which is unacceptable. You're seeing Larry Ogunjobi, who was playing like a difference maker early on in the season, miss some games due to an injury, has come back and has not been that same guy since he's came back, to the point to where Billy Price, the backup center for the Cincinnati Bengals, is holding his own against him. Sheldon Richardson, on the other hand, I think he's been the closest thing Myles has had to have. Sheldon Richardson, on the other hand, I'll give him some slack. I think he's been the closest thing Myles Garrett has had to any type of help on that defensive line. He's producing his normal load. The thing is that what his normal load is at this point in Sheldon's career is not really going to be enough to offset the things that Myles can do so you can get the most out of Myles Garrett. And also the biggest problem the Browns have when it comes to this defense is what in the world do they do when Myles Garrett has to get rest? Because defensive linemen are going to need to get off the field and get some rest at some point, or else they're going to be fatigued and they're not going to be effective in the 4th and 3rd quarters. And the problem with the Browns is that it's legitimately terrifying how little push they get when Myles Garrett isn't out there. So what can help this problem? One, I think getting a guy like a Carlos Dunlap or a Ryan Kerrigan available pretty cheap. You just saw Everson Griffin go for a 6th-round pick. I think that can help add depth to the rotation, which is the most important thing. Look, I don't think you're going to find somebody who's going to line up opposite of Myles and get 8 to 10 sacks at this point in the season. I don't think it's going to be Olivier Vernon. It's not going to be Adrian Claiborne or Porter Gustin. You're just not going to have that. So your second best bet, if you're the Browns defense, is to do what you can to make that gap of when Myles needs rest and when Myles is on the field as small as possible. And how do you do that? You load this edge rush position up with a ton of depth. You have a Carlos Dunlap out there with Adrian Claiborne when both of your top edges need rest, so they can be well rested into the 4th quarter and then still attack with that same vigor that they do in the 1st and 2nd quarter. Think about it in basketball terms, right? At this point of the season, you're not going to find LeBron James a legitimate co-star to be a number 2 in his big 3 or whatever. But you could find LeBron James somebody who can help bolster the bench depth so LeBron doesn't have to play as many minutes, which means he's fresher in the 4th quarter. Same thing goes for Myles Garrett. You're not going to find him a running mate at this point, but you could find enough depth in the trade market that you don't have to run him down to the ground just to get him to the 4th quarter. When Myles is well rested in the 4th quarter, he helps you finish games, so it's absolutely worth whatever you're going to give up to get that small help. I would also not mind seeing the Browns add in another interior defensive lineman. I think they've missed depth in that position. Jordan Elliott just hasn't been consistently there. They have some guys that they picked up off the waiver wire playing in those positions at times. I think if you could have got somebody like a Mike Daniels early in the offseason, or even have had Andrew Billings who opted out, I think you would have a much better looking rotation there. The problem is also that Sheldon Richardson gets tired, Larry Ogunjobi gets tired, and you don't really have depth to replace them. And when those guys get fatigued, in order to get any type of pressure, you're going to have to blitz. And blitzing has been a serious problem I'm going to talk about with this defense that has put them in a lot of peril and put this defense in a lot of bad situations where they can't recover from. So if I'm the Browns, I do everything possible to close that gap of level of play. You're not going to equal it. You're not going to match it, but close it to where you can have it be acceptable so you can have Myles Garrett take more rest during these games so he can be more fresh for the first quarter. Like, Miles only gets like 1 or 2 drives off because that's all the defense can afford. But if you get enough depth to where Miles can take what is equivalent to about a half a quarter off instead of just a couple of drives, then you're going to have a much more rested Myles Garrett, a much more explosive Myles Garrett to close these games, and that's going to be an important thing. I'm not looking for a ton of production out of whoever you trade for, but just enough to where you can live with Myles off the field to get him some rest. But that's the first key. I think the second key is another thing that should be fairly obvious. Think about the Browns' 2 most abysmal defensive performance. I would say it's the second half against the Cowboys, and it's the entire game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And do you know what those 2 games have in common, or those 2 areas of the game have in common? The Browns were blitzing a ton. They weren't blitzing a lot in the first half against Dallas. That's why the score was low. But in the second half, they had to blitz because everybody was tired. They had a couple injuries going on the defensive line. That's when Dak shredded this defense alive. This team simply does not have the coverage ability to be able to blitz and have the blitz be effective. And it's not because your blitzers are bad. It's not because your defensive linemen aren't penetrating. It's simply because your coverage units aren't fast enough, aren't agile enough, and aren't communicating at a high enough level to be in the right spots to allow those pass rushers to have enough time to even get to the quarterback. It was a huge problem against Joe Burrow, where you saw that these blitzes were coming, the pocket was collapsing, Joe just got the ball out of his hand faster than they can physically run to him, and that's an issue. So yeah, the blitzes could work if the coverage is held up, but I have very little faith that the coverages are going to hold up. And because what happens when the Browns blitz on most occasions is that they turn their free safeties and their strong safeties into defensive backs. And that's not good. You don't want Andrew Sadeo one-on-one with anybody, especially a wide receiver, but anybody, period. You don't want Ronnie Harrison one-on-one with a wide receiver because he's not fast. If he's one-on-one with the tight end, you can live with that, but a wide receiver, that's not a good matchup for Ronnie. And that's where you have these situations where you're seeing Andrew Sadeo getting burnt or somebody else getting burnt. It's because you're not putting your coverage units in the best position to succeed. The problem with the Cleveland Browns is that they're not great in the middle or at the back end. They have really good edge corners with Terrence Mitchell and Denzel Ward, and then hopefully one day Greedy Williams comes back from his nerve injury, even though that can be a difficult thing to come back from. You're fine there on the edges, and your linebackers haven't been terrible. It's really just the back end that's been hurting you a lot, and you don't help your back end when you send all your linebackers and a corner, your slot corner, Kevin Johnson, on a blitz and kind of just leave them out there naked to cover when you know they can't cover. So if I were the Browns, just give up on the blitz. Just blitz very minimally, blitz to surprise teams, but just live with your front four, add some depth there. But please, please, please stop blitzing. Because let's be honest about this team and this defense. The only hope to sack the quarterback is Myles Garrett. And when I see things like I saw against Cincinnati where you're blitzing 6 guys and then having Myles Garrett drop back in coverage, that infuriates me because now you're blitzing, you're losing guys in coverage, and also you're not even letting your best pass rusher rush the passer. He's out in the coverage. And the Browns, of course, got torched on that play. It's just not working. The blitzes just ain't going to work. You don't have the coverages to hold up on them. If you don't blitz, you invest in this defensive line a little bit more so you can have a more rested Myles Garrett. Your defense is going to be able to get some pressure with their front four, and you'll be able to cover good enough with everybody else that you're going to be able to live with the results. But the times that the Browns were barely able to live with the results are the times that they have to blitz. So stop blitzing. But that's my thoughts on what I think can help this Browns defense get to that level where they could be middling to mediocre. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.